Welcome, everybody. Steve with Sensus Fidelium coming at you with, I guess you'd say, a correction video. Not exactly a response video, as I hate them when you see all the guys going after someone else, say, yeah, I'm making name calling, poop slinging, and all that stuff. But there was a video put out the other day by someone in our circle, Dr. Marshall, who I don't hate and I don't dislike. And I don't, in his video, he said the haters and detractors. I don't want to think that fraternal correction or correcting errors is hatred or detracted on somebody. Just want to put out the corrections on the falsities that maybe he wasn't aware of. I don't think he meant any ill intention out of it. But it's just one of those things. Hey, I thought about that stuff back in the day before I started really getting into the founders and things like that. I mean, 2010-ish, 2009, 2008, that's all I ate up was the Federalists, Anti-Federalists, Mike Churchill, who's, if you ever listen to his stuff, I mean, he's got 4 different production DVDs, CDs on the founding, the ratification debates. The Spirit of 76 was a documentary that he did, that if anybody does homeschooling, I think they still have the homeschooling thing, that he'll send you the DVD. So I was all in on that. I would go home after a night out and listen to him on Sirius XM, because he would always cite the founders. I mean, it was just Patrick Henry, George Mason, all those guys. Andrew Wilcox would do that too. But then that was during my days of being a assistant sales rep at the time. So when I heard stuff like this, it's kind of like in my lane in a sense. You're not going to see me do a video on St. Thomas Aquinas, for example. Do I know some things? Yes. Do I consider myself an expert? No way. If someone comes up to me and says you're an expert in St. Thomas Aquinas, I would ask them how high they are. There's no way. I wouldn't know. I mean, I know some guys, but I wouldn't consider me an expert at any of that to be able to go, hey, I'm clicking live, let's go. But in this stuff, yeah, this is right up my alley. So when I heard the videos, I saw it and listened to it while I was working out going, I can't believe I'm hearing some of this stuff. So I wanted to do a little correction. Again, fraternal correction. As Garcia Moreno had the line, error like evil has no rights. Was some of the stuff said truthfully? Yes. Let's get right to it. So here's the video, why we must reject separation of church and state. Totally cool with that. No problem on that. As Pius IX in his Syllabus of Errors has that, Charles Calhoun back in the day had a thing with his partner. They said on the thing, it should be read as, it is evil to believe at the beginning of all the errors. So it's evil to believe the church ought to be separated from the church and the state from the church. Pius IX, Syllabus of Errors, Proposition 55, 1864. Why is that year important? It's right smack dab in the middle of the 19th century nationalism movement, the 48ers, all that stuff that was going on, the revolutions in Germany. Germany went from 200 states down to 25 before World War I, down to unified Germany. Italy, you had all these kingdoms, Spain, all these kingdoms, all France, all these kingdoms, and that's where we get the monarch. Everyone wants to talk about the Catholic monarchy, but they don't talk about that part. They didn't reign an entire landmass. Again, look it up. You had the German unification from Hitler right before World War I. If there wasn't a unification, you don't have, after World War I, before World War II, you don't have this stuff happening. I play it all the time with Dr. Woods.
About some practical considerations that come up when we think about secession. We look at the history of political consolidation. We go in Europe from thousands of independent territorial units to just a few dozen today. As Hans Hoppe has pointed out, in the second half of the 17th century, Germany was made up of 234 countries, 51 free cities, and 1,500 independent knightly manors. By the early 19th century, all three had fallen below 50. And then, of course, by 1871, we get German unification. What might the world have been like in the absence of German unification is the kind of question that is not raised because it is not on the card. The card says that centralization is a progressive force, so you don't think about contrary to fact scenarios that deny centralization occurred. But it might be interesting to see how the 20th century might have turned out had Hitler simply been a good postmaster general, which was how one German official put it. Similar situation, of course, occurred in Italy with the consolidation there. What are the economic effects of centralization? We're sometimes told that great big countries make you richer. We have to have great big countries to be rich. Well, the Soviet Union was a great big country. Nobody really was rich unless he was politically well connected there. China's a great big country. People are becoming somewhat wealthier there, but throughout most of the 20th century, I wouldn't have held it up as a model. And yet, little Singapore, little Hong Kong are flourishing. There is no connection between size and economic prosperity. It has to do with the policies pursued by the governments of those areas. And the more territorial units you have, the more pressure there is on the political leaders of these places not to oppress the public, because the power of exit is very easy when there's another political unit right next door. It's easy to go there. And these leaders will lose their tax, suckers, if they impose too many unjust burdens on the people. So they are restrained by the presence of competition. It is impossible to imagine the horrors of the Soviet Union being inflicted by the mayor of a small village.
Here are some reasons why Pius IX did the Syllabus of Errors. One, to condemn modern ideologies he saw as harmful. The 19th century saw rapid political and philosophical change, liberalism, nationalism, rationalism. Remember? 19th century nationalism, centralization of power of government everywhere. Socialism, which socialism at that time and communism were interchangeable. If you watch the video I did on the 1848ers, the 48er revolution, that you'll see that's the same thing. And secularism was rising throughout Europe. Pius IX believed many of these movements undermined the authority of the church, traditional Christian morality, the role of religion in public life, the unity and stability of Catholic societies. The syllabus was meant to list and reject these errors clearly and systematically. 2, to reassert the church's teaching authority. The church had lost political influence, especially in Italy, where the papal states were being absorbed into a new secular nation. Again, centralization of power, centralization government, unification, the same idea. Pius IX saw a need to define Catholic teaching firmly in the face of secular governments restricting the church. Remember, communism was moving up, socialism moving up. It's religion of atheism. Remember, he got kicked out and was in Gaeta, exiled in Gaeta for a while. The Holy Face image comes up when he's in Gaeta. Bada bing. Pius IX saw the need to define Catholic teaching firmly in the face of secular governments, anti-clerical legislation, philosophies claiming authority independent of God or revelation. Issuing the syllabus was a way of reaffirming that the church, not the modern state, held ultimate moral authority. And what do you see today? Most people look at the church. It's flip-flop. The state telling the church what to do. Remember the Rona a couple of years ago? The state was telling the church it can't do anything. Walmart was fine and McDonald's was okay, but the church was being told you can't do anything. As a defense against separation of church and state, several condemned propositions deal with the idea that religion should be private and that the state should be neutral toward religion. Pius IX viewed such trends as threats to the well-being of Catholic societies. The syllabus rejects ideas such as the church should adapt to modern civilization. The state should control education without the church. What do you see today? Communist platform, public education. All states should be treated as equally valid. The Pope should reconcile with progress, liberalism, and modern civilization. For Pius IX, these trends endanger the spiritual life of nations. 4, in response to specific controversies of his papacy, the syllabus wasn't written in isolation. It collected earlier condemnations Pius IX already had made in encyclicals and allocutions. It addressed real concrete challenges of his time, including revolutions in Europe, 1848. No one wants to talk about the 48ers. who came over during the Lincoln administration, got inside the Lincoln administration, and you have the GOP that we have today is still that same GOP from the Lincoln administration with those 48ers in it. The loss of papal states, philosophical materialism and atheism, increasing secular control of marriage, education, and property. The document was meant as a comprehensive summary of these prior rulings. And number 5, to provide clarity for Catholics. The purpose was not to create new doctrine, but to clarify what Catholics must reject, protect the faithful from confusion, guide bishops in dealing with modern errors in their diocese, and in the age of rapid change, Pius IX wanted a clear line drawn. In summary, Pius IX wrote these in Syllabus of Errors to defend the church against perceived threats of modernity, uphold the church's authority, and provide clear guidance on doctrines he believed were under attack. It was a defensive document shaped by the turmoil of the 19th century and the challenges the church faced during his long pontificate. Just for some fun, I'm going to have... Don't take this the wrong way. Just for some fun, since he's doing a liver health thing, I got my own liver health here. It costs about $35 to make a 3-4 year supply. Vodka, dandelion, and burdock root, and there you go. An easy DIY. I have my own. I make my own I make our own medicine, and I know that website has sleep stuff and all that. I made all that stuff. So if you want to, if you want to learn it, just hit me up, or I'll show you where you can learn that from. Piece of cake. We do it every night. So I get back to the separation of the church and state. As Dr. Bronsher brought up in his video, he only brought up the wall of separation. He didn't really get into context. He didn't get in context at all. He just brought up the wall of separation. And he's brought that up in many shows and shorts and things like that, where context is key. Just like in apologetics, you need context. Text without context is pretext, just like the kitty on the table type deal. What are we talking about? Again, wall of separation. What does that mean? Now, if you take it just out of its own, that sounds terrible. Wall of separation. Holy cow. That's, what did Pius IX just condemned? 100% with you. Problem is, that's not what Jefferson was talking about. Let me bring up, this is from the Abbeville Institute right here, the 14th Amendment mindset, the Miracle Amendment that happened after Lincoln's War, which wasn't even an amendment that wasn't even enacted legally. If you go back into it, because that's getting off in the weeds, but it was even it's invalid pretty much. But it's what everyone uses now. We live in a 14th Amendment Constitution. Anyways, let's get to here's Professor Brion McClanahan, Abbeville Institute, and his own podcast, Brion McClanahan Show, on this Danbury Baptist issue.
Okay. Now, I want to go back to 1801 because there was a Supreme Court justice from Alabama named Hugo Black. And Hugo Black, in the middle of the 20th century, essentially gave us the modern incorporation doctrine. And he did it through Thomas Jefferson, in a very strange reading of Thomas Jefferson, but that's what he did. So I want to go back to 1801 and talk about the very famous exchange between Jefferson and the Danbury Baptists. The Danbury Baptists are in Connecticut, and they're concerned in 1801. Why? Well, because Connecticut has a state-established church, and it's not a Baptist church. And the state-established church in Connecticut is infringing on their freedom of religion. Well, does that sound odd? This is 1801. When were the Bill of Rights ratified? 1791. This is 10 years later. And the Danbury Baptists are saying, we don't have any freedom of religion in Connecticut. Well, why? Because the First Amendment didn't apply to Connecticut, and everybody knew it. So they write to Thomas Jefferson. He'd been elected president. He's now president of the United States, and they want to congratulate him, but also bring up a point. They say, sir, we are sensible that the President of the United States is not the national legislator. Wow, that's remarkable. And also sensible that the national government cannot destroy the laws of each state. Oh my gosh. These guys sound pretty good. But our hopes are strong that the sentiments of our beloved president, which have had such genial effect already, like the radiant beams of the sun, will shine and prevail through all these states and all the world till hierarchy and tyranny be destroyed from the earth. So we're hoping that you, the sun president, will destroy everything in the earth, all these bad things. Sir, when we reflect on your past services and see a glow of philanthropy and goodwill shining forth in a course of more than 30 years, we have reason to believe that America's God has raised you up to fill the chair of state out of that goodwill which he bears to the millions which you preside over. May God strengthen you for the arduous task which Providence and the voice of the people have called you to sustain and support you in your administration against all the predetermined opposition of those who wish to rise to wealth and importance on the poverty and subjection of the people. So that's a nice way of, praising Thomas Jefferson. But the first two lines are important. This is what everybody misses in the letters of the Danbury Baptists. They don't read this part because Jefferson responds in kind. He's responding to their point that we know you can't do anything about this, but we hope one day, like the sun, the beams of Jeffersonianism will wipe out all this tyranny and oppression in America. So Jefferson responds. And this is 1802. He writes it in 1801. It goes to the Danbury Baptists in 1802. He says, quote, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now notice, I put there in, that's my emphasis, but their legislature. Who is he talking about there? The Congress, the U.S. Congress, not the state of Connecticut. He's saying, well, this is good. We have an amendment to the Constitution that prohibits the U.S. Congress from doing this stuff, but he's not saying anything about Connecticut. They can do whatever they want. Thus, building a wall of separation between church and state. That's the line that's pulled. But he's not talking about the states as Connecticut or Virginia. He's talking about Congress. Everyone takes that out of context, including Hugo Black. Congress, thus inhibited from acts respecting their religion and the executive authorized only to execute their acts, I have refrained from prescribing even occasional performances of devotion prescribed, indeed, legally where an executive is the legal head of a national church, but subject here as religious exercises only to the voluntary regulations and disciplines of each respective sect. Now, I added the emphasis there because he cut that out of the letter. But he basically explains there, I don't have any power to do anything what you're asking me to do. I can't do that. I don't even give you, these declarations of, proclamations of prayer or thanksgiving. I don't do that either. I don't think I should. But Connecticut's on your own, right? And in fact, what the Danbury Baptists were trying to get Jefferson to do essentially was do this very thing, issue some type of proclamation that would, have a day of thanksgiving or prayer. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation on behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights conceived. He has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. So he's hoping that one day Connecticut will get on board with this idea of freedom of religion, but he has no power to do it.
Again, as he said, that part, the wall of separation between church and state, has been taken out of context, ripped out of context, and created to something else. It means the federal government, the national government, the general government has a wall between the church and the state. And that is, and the quote, state, the state church. State is synonymous with country. Every state, if you look at the Treaty of Paris after the war, it puts on equal standing each state with the United Kingdom. Virginia on equal par with with England as a state. Virginia is a state. Thomas Jefferson used to call his country the state, called his country Virginia, my country of Virginia. They all thought that back then. They all said that back then because each state was its country. The state can do anything it wants. Most of the people don't know that each state has its own constitution. Look it up and you'll see. And yes, things that the good doctor got right was that the 12 of the 13 states had official religions. You can have, and I've brought this up before, if people want a Catholic state, you can do that at your state level. You're not going to be able to pull that off at the DC and the general government. Hence federalism, which is what Jefferson pushed, which is what decentralization, subsidiarity. It's a Catholic idea, but we have jettisoned that Catholic idea for centralization. And like I said, this isn't a smack on Dr. Marshall. It's not a smack on everyone. That's what we've been in. It's kind of like how fathers talked about, we swim in a pool of modernism water. You're going to get some modernism because you're swimming in the water. You're going to get some centralization ideas because that's what we've been bred since we were wee lads. And think about it. I mean, back the Pledge of Allegiance that came from a socialist, Francis Bellamy, who saw people reverting back to state rights idea after the war and came up with this pledge. I swear allegiance to the flag. By the way, it was the original pledge salute was your handout like that. Some guy liked that idea too, and he brought it over to Germany. It's one nation, and under God didn't come till the Knights of Columbus in the 1950s put it at one nation and indivisible. I refuse to say that thing anymore, by the way. It is not indivisible. Remember, Jefferson was totally cool with the secession movement of the Northeast, which there was like 3 or 4 of them, and mentioned it because it was after Louisiana. One of them was after Louisiana Purchase, and they said it was unconstitutional, and they thought the Southerners were going to just keep on gaining this power, and the Northeast Puritans, which we live in a puritanical government now, because that's this Puritan mindset. The Puritans are a centralized group, not in a communistic idea, but the rights of the individual are not in the Puritan idea. It's the good for the community. So everything about the community is over the individual in the puritanical idea. That's what you see today. And you see a lot of us will think about that. Again, to have this mindset that the central government, which again, Doctor and everyone else, most everyone are, you think of Roe. We have to have a centralized amendment to get rid of abortion. No, you don't. You just get the states back out. That's what happened with the last ruling a couple of years ago. Brought it back to the states. Immediately, trigger laws came in, knocked out abortion. You take out anything you want at the state level. Federal government only has 17 enumerated powers. They don't have any powers. The president is only supposed to do a couple things. Commander-in-chief in a war, and when a bill comes across his desk, he's supposed to sign it if it's constitutional, has no clue, doesn't matter what it is, if he likes it or not. If it's constitutional, he has to sign it. If it's unconstitutional, he has the duty to veto it. Obviously, none of them in the last 160, 100, 200 years have done something like that, especially the last 160. I mean, basically, it's the phone and a pen, as Obama talked about before, with all these executive orders. The president's not a legislature. He doesn't make laws. Yet we actually think he does. We make him as an elected king anymore. People don't like the no kings thing, which is kind of funny because they don't mind it if their team is in kingship at the time. But you have an elected monarch, and the Anti-Federalists at that time predicted all this. Mason, Henry, all those guys. I mean, even Franklin said that. Franklin, no fan of Franklin on his lifestyle, but again, not a fan of all Jefferson's lifestyle either. This is just a defense on what the mindset, the Jeffersonian Democrats, which was the conservative movement. They looked, the haters looked at the Democrats at that time before 1860s as the backwards part. It was, we hate those. You talk about how the vile language that they have today, they talk down on those guys. They called conservatives as like a slang, a little ad hominem and saying, oh, you're a conservative, blah, blah, blah. These were the conservatives. People get twins, because they think the Democrat Party now is the same as then. No, that Democratic Party got destroyed in the 1860s. You got a different thing that came out of the Republican groups because the current GOP, that's both of those kind of like a schism. It's the same party anyways, but it's got the fake left and the fake right. Red versus blue. It's the same thing. You're going the same way maybe at a little different speed. There's no difference in those guys. Somebody had a line that said, was it Reagan? There's a GOP that said, he'll give you socialism, but on Tuesday. The other guys will give you socialism now. So it's a little different speed. So yeah, because I mean, Jefferson was a deist. They all were. Jefferson I think he was a Freemason. At least most of those guys were. All but one, maybe. I did a thing long ago, and I counted all of them. It was like 40s or 50s of the signers, and a high percentage. They were almost Freemasons. I mean, the Washington Freemasonic Memorial, and you've seen the guard when he's laying down they're laying down the Capitol and all that. He's standing there in regalia, the Freemason regalia. They were all Freemasons. That was the thing back then. Franklin, big time Freemason. All those guys were. It's just then you got the Anti-Federalists and then the Federalists, which actually the Anti-Federalists were the true Federalist guys. It was kind of backwards on the wordings of those. But yeah, Jefferson, they were for the small. They did not like, I mean, that's why Adams and Jefferson were added for that, because Adams goes over to England, sees the monarchy, wants to be it when he comes back over here. By the way, Adams was the one that called the Catholics, mocking them, saying they pray in a language that no one knows, no one understands. I mean, he goes over to England. If you've seen the movie Adams, John Adams, and you see this, he got messed up, and Jefferson talked about that. He got indebted into the waters of the English king at the time. So he comes back over, and that's when you get the Alien and Sedition Acts, which Jefferson and Madison both write. If you haven't read them, read them, and take down what Adams was coming up with. And actually, Jefferson did that again after he retired back in his plantation, because he went back to Virginia. And again, he was from Virginia. He lived in Virginia. He was a Virginian. And did he have slaves? Yes. Guess who else had slaves? The entire world had slaves. Any race had slaves. Every person had slaves. Professor Kevin Gutzman, who wrote a great biography on Jefferson. If you haven't read it, read it. He talks about that he goes, why don't they go after everyone else in the world? It's always the colonies. It's always here. Why is it that? I mean, Spain had slaves. What do you think? Is it Saudi Arabia just ended slavery in 1971 or something like this? There's slavery going on today, but yet it's always, he had slaves. He had slaves. What about the slave thing? So yeah, everybody had slaves. Not everybody. Anybody that had money had slaves, because slaves wasn't exactly like picking strawberries. If you read the book Defending Dixie, you'll see that people usually, sometimes the people that owned slaves worked next to the slaves. It was a mutual thing for a profit, and then they paid the slaves. Slaves had their own had a side business going on in the South. The slavery in the South wasn't like the slavery in other places where it was just horrific. It was there was a book on, was it Coming Out of Africa or something like that? I can't remember the name of it, but it talked about people excited because they were afraid they were going to get eaten by those tribes. They were happy to be over. Anyway, off topic. Again, for people who bring up Jefferson had slaves. Apparently, he tried, speaking of that, in the Declaration, he condemned the slave trade, called it an evil that the crown brought onto the colonies. Before all that, him and his brother started this abolitionist movement. And then people say, yeah, he still had owned slaves. Apparently, there was something about the debt. He owed money for the slaves, I think, or something like that. And he couldn't free them when he wanted to free them because of whatever the right of attainment, whatever it was. I got to look it up again. And so he couldn't do that like that because there was a rule. He had some kind of produce, and there was a letter to a friend of his saying that when it comes out that he's going to give his slaves like a big cut or something like this. And it ended up the crop failed, and so we don't know what happened afterwards. But yeah, and they didn't. They had property. There's a whole idea of men, the all men are created equal thing. That was in his head, even though, yes, he had slaves. So it looks like hypocritical. Most people that look at it have no clue about his life in a sense. Again, I'm not putting him up as one guy said, an idol or anything like that. It's just, let's get clear. Let's be honest on what we're talking about here. Brings up the Sally Hemings myth.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek. I'm a Thomas Jefferson scholar, and I'd like to talk to you today about Thomas Jefferson and his avowed affair with Sally Hemings, his slave. Now, I want to start off with Jefferson scholar. She's known to be the world's foremost authority on Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, Annette Gordon-Reed from Harvard University, and she says, symbolically, it's tremendously important for people as a way of inclusion. Nathan Huggins said that the Sally Hemings story was a way of establishing black people's birthright to America. If you look at the flip side of it, rejecting the story is a part of the rejecting of black people's birthright in claims to America. So again, this smacks of what goes on with the 1619 thesis. The whole idea is that there have to be some way of including African American people in the story of the founding of the country here. So she's doing it by having Thomas Jefferson father children with his slave. Now let's go to a brief history here. Fawn Brodie in 1974 writes Thomas Jefferson, An Intimate History. 1979, Barbara Chase Ribaud writes Sally Hemings, a novel. In 1995, Jefferson in Paris is a movie that comes out and shows Sally Hemings to be a young, beautiful, elegant woman. Then comes the DNA study in 1998, spearheaded by Eugene Foster. The DNA study shows that the final child of Sally Hemings has the Thomas Jefferson Y chromosome. And if you know anything about biology, all that means is Jefferson could have been the father of Eston, was born in 1808, or any male in Jefferson's line could have been the father of Eston Hemings. Now, Nature magazine came right out and said, Jefferson fathered slave's last child. There never was such a sea change in historical opinion as there was at this time. Almost all historians who thought Jefferson didn't father any of Hemings' children now change their mind and say, okay, Jefferson did father Eston Hemings and presumably fathered all of the children. The key event for me, what brought me to Lynchburg, is in 2018, the pundits at the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello said that Jefferson definitely fathered all of Sally Hemings' children, even though none of the evidence had changed, nothing had been added. All we had was DNA evidence that showed Jefferson could have fathered Eston, no genetic evidence of anything else. Primary source evidence, that is eyewitness claims, people whose testimony could be admitted in a court of law. In terms of Jefferson, the pro-paternity case, that Jefferson was the father of all the children, there are 0 bits of primary evidence that show Jefferson fathered. They have nothing. Evidence against paternity, there are 4 bits of evidence, and one of which is the testimony of Thomas Jefferson himself in 1805. Jefferson, presumably when he was a young man, not yet married, his neighbor and friend Thomas Walker had some affairs to conduct with the Native Americans miles and miles away, and he asked Jefferson to look after his wife. Thomas presumably did more than look after his wife and made a pass at her, or presumably consummated a sexual affair with her. I suspect that there was no sexual affair, but he admits to having made a pass at her. In 1805, while he's president, he says, "You will perceive that I plead guilty to one of their charges, that when young and single I offered love to a handsome lady. I acknowledge its incorrectness. It is the only one founded in truth among all their allegations." Now, by implication, when he says the only one, this rules out the Sally Hemings affair. The Sally Hemings affair had been circulating quite robustly at the time. There is another testimony by Overseer Edmund Bacon, who in 1862, he's talking about some male leaving Sally Hemings' room at Monticello early in the morning. Bacon is responding to a suspicion that Jefferson freed Sally Hemings' daughter, Harriet Hemings, because she was his daughter. And Bacon says, she was not his daughter, not Thomas Jefferson's daughter. She was blank's daughter. I know that. I have seen him come out of her mother's room many a morning when I went up to Monticello very early. So we have primary evidence of someone who sees someone other than Thomas Jefferson coming out of Sally Hemings' room. Very important evidence. Then there's the testimony of slave Isaac Jefferson, which implicates to some extent Thomas Jefferson's brother, Randolph Jefferson. He says something to the effect, he says, "Oh, Massa Randolph, He used to hang around the slaves at Mulberry Road till all hours in the morning, fiddle and sing all hours of the night. He says he ain't got no more sense than Isaac, in other words, myself. So we have testimony that puts Jefferson's brother at the scene of the crime. Lastly, we have the testimony of Abigail Adams when Jefferson's daughter Mary comes to France. She first goes to England, and Abigail Adams takes care of her. And in 2 separate letters to Thomas, she says, talking about Sally Hemings, who had accompanied Mary Jefferson on the boat ride, and Sally is 14, Mary's 8 at the time. And Abigail says in 2 separate letters that the woman accompanying the child wants more attention than the child. By implication, again, it's very suggestive that if Mary is 8 at the time, then woman Sally Hemings, who is supposed to be taking care of her, is acting at perhaps a level of maturity at 7 years of age. Now, it's a very credible testimony, Abigail Adams. The complete case for the people at Monticello rests on the Madison Hemings testimony in 1873, where he said Jefferson was my father. That testimony is secondary testimony, and Gordon Reed goes on to say at one point, this testimony is so critical to our case that it needs to be used and taken as primary source testimony. So by fiat, she wants to claim secondary testimony needs to be taken as primary, which is something you just can't do in scholarship. Lastly, I'll leave you off with a quote from Gordon Reed, who's the main player here, and she's talking about people who come and visit Monticello and are put off by the notion that they're going to hear about Sally Hemings. She says, some people come here, in other words, Monticello, and say, I didn't come here to a slave plantation to hear about slavery. There's nothing to do, she says, but to keep pushing back. That's the notion here. Whether you want to hear it or not, we're going to talk about Jefferson's racism. We're going to talk about him possibly raping Sally Hemings, even if the evidence is not suggestive in the least. That's the agenda, and it seems to me that the Thomas Jefferson Foundation has what I call a racist agenda, an agenda where they're going to use race to work towards racial equality, which I think is a fine thing. But in the process, we're going to drag Thomas Jefferson through the mud, which I don't think is a good thing. History is about veridicality.
Here is Dr. Gutzman, historian of Jefferson and Madison, on Jefferson creating schools.
And his solution was, well, the government, the state government, ought to establish a system in which each community had a local, what we would now call an elementary school, so that every free child, and that included, in his language, he didn't say girls, but he said every child, so that included girls. In fact, he didn't say that doesn't include blacks. Apparently it included blacks. And at one point, he got a letter from a Quaker reformer who was working on the idea of educating the slaves, and Jefferson said, well, there's no reason why that couldn't be inferred from the language of my bill for this purpose. But anyway, he thought that each community ought to have a 3-year public primary school, and then at the end of those 3 years, the best student from each community ought to be selected to be sent at public expense to a regional intermediate level school for 3 years. And finally, the best of those students ought to be selected each year to go on to William and Mary. So if you were wealthy, you could still send your kids to the middle school and the William and Mary if you wanted to, but this was going to enable people beyond the few rich to send their kids to William and Mary. And actually in colonial Virginia, there was no public education. There were no primary and secondary schools, and we think about half of Virginia men were illiterate when the Revolution began.
This is on 1825. Jefferson's already gone out of presidency, but he's still pushing for nullification over unconstitutional overreaches. This one by, I think, J.Q. Adams' administration.
In 1825, unhappy with the fact that the Hamiltonian tariff program had been dusted off by the new president, John Quincy Adams, Jefferson wrote a draft set of resolutions that he hoped that the Virginia legislature would pass, essentially laying out the old argument from 1798 again. We're not going to accept having the federal government exercise powers that hasn't been delegated. We think that this particular program is unjust to us, and we will resist. And unfortunately, when he passed that along to his friend Madison, as was his chief weakness, his chief bad tendency, and Madison talked him into not being confrontational right now. So Jefferson essentially went to his death listening to Madison one more time, but he still had the old doctrine in mind. There never was a point when he didn't think that this had to be asserted, that this was a live option, that Virginia came first and the federal union was for Virginians' convenience from their point of view. And I show in the chapter on federalism that he was more of a radical in this connection than most people realize. One of the main things I hope that people will get out of the book is that the main scholars of Jefferson, the most famous ones, Stu Malone and Merrill Peterson and so on, have tried to obfuscate this point. For one thing, Merrill Peterson edited the Library of Virginia edition of Jefferson's writings, and he excluded a lot of the main documents having to do with Jefferson's confrontational federalism. So, for example, these 1825 resolutions aren't included, and there are several of the letters Jefferson wrote about this question that aren't included in the Library of America book of Thomas Jefferson writings. One of them is the petition that he wrote in 1797 for his fellow citizens of Albemarle County to present to the General Assembly in response to the fact that a federal grand jury in Richmond had handed up a presentment against their congressman, Samuel Cabell, for having dared to criticize John Adams' foreign policy. So Jefferson thought at that point that the Richmond federal grand jurors should be indicted for treason against Virginia. Well, you might think that was pretty interesting, but that's not in the Library of America volume Thomas Jefferson writings, even though it's, I think, about the thickest volume in the entire series, going to about 1,500 pages.
So again, if we did what Jefferson was talking about, instead of bashing him, we're bringing him, let's learn what his mindset was on politics, Roe would have been destroyed after, 5 minutes. Obergefell, gone. 2 minutes before the ink dries, nullified. But we don't have that mindset. But we're bashing him for, I don't know why. Because of 4 words that were in that you took out of context, and everyone takes out of context. And yes, that is a condemned idea, but that's not what he said, because if that was the case, then all the states wouldn't have state religions, and he would have we would have stopped them all, which he didn't. Which another thing is, when people say, hey, look at what look what each state said to be qualifications to be in office, fantastic, great. Are you going to tell me that everyone is honest? How many people are dishonest out there? There's another one, Jefferson and Calhoun. How many people are honest in running for politics? If the question is for you to run for politics, you have to give this creed, whatever we say. How many do you think could have been non-believers and go, you know what? I'm just going to say the words and I'm going to get in.
Explaining to Abigail what went down, why he had to do this. He said, I discharged every person under punishment or prosecution under the sedition law because I considered and now consider that law to be a nullity, as absolute and as palpable as if Congress had ordered us to fall down and worship a golden image. It's the same type of a viewpoint that Tucker had. Soon as they do any act outside the Constitution, it's a nullity. It deserves to be treated that way. No one is bound to obey them, but people who take an oath of office, they're bound to do something to oppose them. And this is really just what Jefferson this is what Jefferson had to say about it, and that it was as much my duty to arrest its execution in every stage. It was his duty, not just a good idea, not just something that his constituents wanted, not something that was politically popular. He didn't care because it was his duty once he took an oath of office. If he considered something unconstitutional, it was his duty to try to arrest the progress of that evil at every turn possible.
Now, to the point about the oaths, like most of the states had a requirement for some kind of belief, an oath to the office. The 10th Amendment Center had this about a year ago. Let's talk about what goes on here.
Law signed by the first president, George Washington. That was an act to regulate the time and manner of administering certain oaths. It was signed into law June 1st, 1789, and it prescribed, and this is from the National Archives blogs, it prescribed the text of and procedure for the administration of the oath of office. They write that the act mandated that the oath be administered in the following form. And this is the original version. I do solemnly swear or affirm, as the case may be, that I will support the Constitution of the United States. And it was a simple, straightforward oath they point out, that fulfilled that constitutional requirement in Article 6. This is the first law passed by Congress. Now, in essence, the founding generation understood the oath as basically an appeal to heaven. Here, for example, is Oliver Wolcott, very influential guy in the Connecticut Ratifying Convention. This is in January of 1788. And he said the Constitution enjoins an oath upon all the officers of the United States. This is a direct appeal to that God who is the avenger of perjury. Such an appeal to him, he said, is a full acknowledgement of his being and providence. An acknowledgement of these great truths is all that the gentlemen contend for. And James Iredell, who was one of the top legal minds of the time in the North Carolina Ratifying Convention, top legal scholar, he was nominated to be one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court by President Washington. And he describes it. He says, according to the modern definition of an oath, it is considered, quote, a solemn appeal to the supreme being for the truth of what is said by a person who believes in the existence of a supreme being and in a future state of rewards and punishments according to that from which will bind his conscience most. So this was basically an appeal to say, well, if you believe these things and you don't follow your oath, you are going to have some problem. It was some kind of an outside pressure. And here from Rob Nadelson in an old paper that he wrote, a law review paper, The Original Meaning of the Establishment Clause. It's very interesting stuff if you want to get really deep into it. He points out that the view that oaths and theism were necessarily connected was more than just merely a view. It was considered the law. The essence, he said, of an oath was an appeal to God and to witness the truth, appeal to God to witness the truth of what one said. Thus, the oath of an atheist, according to the founders, received no recognition. Or, well, James Madison had some thought on this as well. The English courts ruled so prior to American independence, so this was part of the legal tradition, the system of precedence under the unwritten British Constitution. But American courts, he said, also acknowledged this principle as late as 1823. And if you have Edmund Pendleton in a letter to James Madison, just a few weeks after the end of the Philadelphia Convention, also suggested that oaths were basically useless. He said, my last criticism he will probably laugh at. And this is what this is a segue into discussing various parts of the Constitution. He said, though it is really a serious one with me, why require an oath from public officers, yet interdict all religious tests, their only sanction? So he's saying, if you're swearing an oath and you can't prove that you're passing a religious test, how do we know you really believe it? He said, but since a belief of a future state of rewards and punishments can alone give conscientious obligation to observe an oath, it would seem that a test should be required or oaths abolished. James Madison, in response, he didn't necessarily agree or disagree overtly. He took a very interesting he had a really interesting perspective on this, and he responded a few weeks later. He said, is not a religious test, as far as it is necessary or would operate, involved in the oath itself? if the person swearing believes, so this is kind of a contradiction in the Constitution. They're saying no religious test, but then they're requiring oaths. And if you don't believe in a higher power, for example, then, well, what are you swearing an oath to? What are you being held accountable to? And that's the argument that James Madison is saying. He said, if the person swearing believes in the supreme being who is invoked and in the penal consequences of offending him, either in this or a future world or both, he will be under the same restraint from perjury as if he had previously subscribed a test requiring this belief. So in essence, what Madison, the father of the Constitution, is saying, well, there is a religious test, in at least not necessarily overtly, but it's there. He said, on the other hand, if the person in question be an unbeliever in these points and would notwithstanding take the oath, a previous test could have no effect. He would subscribe it as he would take the oath without any principle that could be affected by either. So he's basically saying, like, if you find someone and they don't support one or the other, they're just going to say what they're going to say. That was James Madison's take.
And to be honest, that was Jefferson's take too. He was one of those that actually said, sure, he made it more secular, but he was going, well, these guys are going to lie. We're going to have them swear something and then lie about it. I mean, if they want to get in office, there's a high chance these guys are going to lie about it. And maybe from the corrections department, I think I said earlier that most all were deists. Okay, maybe they weren't all deists. A lot were. Were they all Freemasons? Not everybody was a Freemason. A lot were. Did Jefferson have the Jeffersonian Bible? Yes. Does that make the conservatism that he pushed, the federalism, null and void? No. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to like Jefferson's daily beliefs and things like that. The man spoke like 7 languages. If he was trying to outdo something like science or something like that, he would literally try to be the best scientist. If whoever across the table was the genius scientist of the world at the time, he was going to try to be better than that guy. If there was a student or there was a professor of something, trade that was next to him, he was going to try to outdo that guy. That was his person. He wanted to be the best at, not in a popping way, like, hey, look at me. He wanted to be that guy and be that smart. He wanted to obtain the information to be able to pull it off or say, why is this guy that big? And let me try to beat him in that sense. Okay, now we'll go to the Jeffersonian Bible, which I didn't know much about. I've always heard the stories about it. I didn't really dig deep into it. So let's talk about the Jeffersonian Bible, because that is brought up in this clip with no pushback.
Timothy, Thomas Jefferson had a pretty bad moral personal life. He was, fornicating with his slaves. And
now we already shown that was bunk. It's a myth. Don't know why people keep bringing that up. And this is not making TJ to be a saintly figure or, how would you say, make an idol out of the guy. Let's just be truthful. If we're going to do stuff like this, let's get the facts straight. I mean, provide the evidence too.
And he wrote the Jeffersonian Bible, in which he took the New Testament and he cut out everything that was supernatural. So all the miracles, the resurrection of Christ from the dead, the Trinity, the divinity of Jesus Christ, Thomas Jefferson removed all of that. And he was very vocal. He did not believe that Christ was the Son of God. He did not believe that Christ rose from the dead. He did not believe in the divinity of Christ. And so Thomas Jefferson politically is like to the left of AOC.
I put that last line in because people are going to say, "Oh, he's talking about he's left of AOC in religion." Well, according to the doctor's own words, he's politically left of AOC, which I cannot see anybody agree with that one. That's just such a bad comment. But anyways, here is David. Is it David Barden? Yeah, David Barden. Yeah, David Barden. He was at Wall Builders. Now, I'm no fan of his because he does he's very centralist in the idea and does kind of make the founders on the almost like idol level. But he is, you can find truth from anybody. So let's see what Mr. Barton has to say.
Going back to Jefferson, when people ask me about the Jefferson Bible, that question, I get, well, he cut out all the things he disagreed with. And then I started asking them questions. I said, okay, which Jefferson Bible are you talking about? What do you mean, the Jefferson Bible? Yeah, which one? You're talking about the
And I had no clue there was more than one.
1804, the 1821. There were two? Yeah, well, if they don't know there's two, I know they don't know what they're talking about. Then I asked, well, have you ever read either one of them? Well, no. Well, then how do you know he cut out the miraculous, supernatural? That's what everybody says. Right. So go back and read it. So if we go back to the 1804 version, he's in the White House, he's president, he takes two Bibles, he cuts out sections of the Bible, pastes them all together. Now, that's the first Jefferson Bible, and he did that largely. He had been given a friend, Peace, a guy named Peace gave him a sermon from a guy in Scotland named Bennett. And the guy in Scotland said, look, if you want to reach Native Americans with Christianity, do not give them a Bible. Because if you do, they might read the genealogies. They might read, and that's not what you want. He said, what you need to do is take the teachings of Jesus and give them the teachings of Jesus. Don't give them the whole Bible. And Jefferson, great idea. So what Jefferson cut out was what in Christian terms would be called the red letters of the Bible. So cut out the words of Jesus, pasted them all end to end. If you read that, you find Jesus healing the sick and raising the dead and casting out devils and all the miracles that are there. It's there. And so, okay, what happened to all this supernatural stuff that you said he cut out? Because it's there. And by the way, he did that. He gave that to some missionary friends. He was really close with Native Americans. He was really into wanting to share the Bible with them. And so he gave that to some missionary friends, said, this is much cheaper to print than the whole Bible. These are the teachings of Jesus. And instead of going through 4 teachings and 4 Gospels, it's got the teaching one time, so you don't read it 4 times. So it's what's often called a synoptic Bible. It is just a linear Bible and the teachings. So it has supernatural stuff all throughout. So I say, well, obviously you couldn't have been speaking about the 1804 Bible. You must have been speaking about the 1820 Bible. Have you ever read that? No. Oh, okay, let's talk about that. Because on all this that I'm telling you, this is all recorded in Jefferson's writings. These are in his writings. People look at the product, they don't read what he said or why he did it or anything else. They just jump to this characterization again. So the 1821, Jefferson starts writing so many of his friends. He said, the thing that helps you have limited government is having moral people. And when you have moral people, you have less need for outside government because you have more internal government. So he started reading the writings of every moral philosopher he could find. Pythagoras and Cato and Plato, all the guys. And he told friend after friend, he said, I've read them all, and I think the moral teachings of Jesus are better than any of those teachings. And so what he did in his own handwriting, he went through and picked 81 of what he considered the best moral teachings of Jesus. And he then pasted them end to end in a day book that he had. But because he spoke several languages, he also pasted the same teachings end to end in Latin and in Greek and in French. And so he would read all the teachings of Jesus, 4 languages. And so that's what he read on a daily basis. Nobody really knew he had that book until the Librarian of Congress, Cyrus Adler, in 1886 was talking to a grandson of Jefferson. And the grandson said, I've got his book on all the moral teachings of Jesus. And they said, really? We'd like to buy this. So the Library of Congress bought it. Then in 1902, a Congressman, John Lacey out of Iowa, read this and said, this is the greatest collection of moral teachings we've ever seen. So he started writing op-eds about Jefferson Bible is what it became known as. And so he wrote op-eds, and in 1904, Congress took it and reprinted it and gave a copy to every member of Congress for the next 50 years and said, if you will live by the moral teachings here, you won't have ethical problems, you won't have corruption, etc. And so that's what's called the Jefferson Bible today. They say, it doesn't have any supernatural stuff in it. It does, but that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was collecting moral teachings. So if you're telling me that Jefferson so hated the Bible that he eliminated supernatural, then first you got to explain what the 1804 is all about. Second, I'll show you all sorts of supernatural stuff because there's heaven and hell and angels and all sorts of stuff in the moral teachings of Jesus. So both of them have supernatural. But then I've got to ask you to explain to me why it is that Jefferson was a lifetime member of the Virginia Bible Society. If he so hated Bibles, why was he a lifetime member? And if he so hated Bibles, why was one of the 3 largest contributions he ever gave was to a Bible society to help spread Bibles? And why is it that he gave a full Bible to every one of his kids and grandkids when they learned to read? That was the first reading book he wanted them to have, was a full Bible. So I ask people, if Jefferson so hates the Bible, then how do you explain all this behavior? And the problem is, since about 1903, what's known as the Unitarians have said Jefferson is a Unitarian and he didn't like Jesus, and they've adopted him. But academically, you can't sustain that position.
And maybe somebody's going right now, oh yeah, that Treaty of Paris thing that he said earlier, that's whatever, dude. Here's the Treaty of Paris.
And going further, Joe puts it this way. Later in Article 1, George III reaffirms that not only are his former colonies free, sovereign, and independent, but he vows from that day forward to treat with them as such. Not that he's treating them as such, but he's going to treat with them. That is, if you notice from that letter from Franklin on August 31st, we've been treating. That's how they put that they were working on a treaty. Anyways, Joe goes a little further. He says, notice, moreover, he is not signing a treaty with one nation. He is signing a treaty with 13, each of which is listed at the beginning of Article 1. And Joe goes on covering this idea of free, sovereign, and independent states in this article. I encourage you to read it. I will link to it in the show notes. But with that, let's get to some of the...
Now, some might say, well, yeah, it's all great and good, but we want a Christian nation. Okay? 1861, the state of Georgia. You know where Atlanta is? Athens, Savannah? That state of Georgia declared itself in 1861 a Christian nation. You can do that right now today. Any state can do that. You're not going to be able to pull that off at D.C. You're not going to be able to pull that off at the federal level, the general level. You can pull that off in your state localities. Maybe, and also, states need to break up too. States are too big. At the time of Jefferson, there were what 1 million, 2 million population. The state of Alabama has that right now. And Jefferson thought at that time that it was too big to govern with a couple million population. And if you think that's a couple million population in the entire union at that time, yeah, we think that's in a single state, or how was it, 8 million in New York City itself? California, was it 56 million people? Ungovernable. That's not the founders talked about that as was it Madison was the limit was at 33,000 for a public to be. I mean, look at the 1-to-1 ratio. It's one representative for 900,000. That's not representation at all. You have an elected monarch. You don't have any say in anything that goes on. So just to get back to the original podcast and the idea, was he evil as the good doctor said? No. I mean, you have to really do some, who isn't evil then? I mean, what was he going around? Well, he wasn't raping anybody, so that's a myth. If the whole thing was slaves as a thing, then you have to condemn the entire globe at the time. See what else? Why aren't we calling out modern people for doing things that are worse? I mean, we got the Franklin cover-up which ran all the way to the presidency. We got the Epstein thing going on right now. I mean, the morality in D.C. itself, not and just even the states too, is lower than low. So, I mean, if you're going to call Jefferson out, you better call Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush, all those, pretty much everybody around him too. I mean, Scott Bessent is right now, he lives the same way as Pete Buttigieg does, but no one's said a thing about him, and he's a Soros guy, but he has a red hat, so I guess it's okay to live like Pete Buttigieg, but as long as you're on the right team, I guess. I don't know. Caitlyn Jenner, I mean, that's, his kind of flaky type deal, but if we're on team red or team blue, does that make a difference? So evil, the right to the left of AOC, to say something like that, and with all due respect, it's completely ignorant. I do not understand how somebody can look through the history of what Jefferson said and did and say that's to the left of AOC. And I tell you that because if AOC is a socialist communist, and they were all agree with that, and compare that to somebody who is for decentralization, a small federal government, nullification, what else? Wanted equal opportunity for everybody. Look at, like I said, read Gutzman's book, and you'll see stuff like that. Free and independent, obviously. Looked at his state as the country. Looked at the federal government's overreach. Looked down on the federal courts as a problem. What else? Again, there's no way anybody that knows just a shred of this topic can say that he's to the left of AOC. It's not a smart comment. Sorry. Hey, if we can't take criticism, if we cannot take anything like that, and you get mad, people get mad because I said that. All right, fine, you're mad. But is it true? And how come no one's mad at the other thing? Is it okay if somebody else says something completely off the wall and we're just supposed to let it go? Or just okay? I just couldn't let that go. I mean, to say that Jefferson's to the left of AOC repeatedly, it's not just like once, like a slip up, just over and over again. I don't know how you pull that off. I mean, where'd you get? That's a level of history and illiteracy that I am not aware of. And if you guys want more, all this will be in the show notes. Some places you can go to is the McClanahanacademy.com. Is the entire course is on reading Jefferson. You see it right here, politically incorrect gateway to the real history education. He teaches homeschool. It's a homeschool network thing. Check it out. Obviously, secession, Declaration of Independence, American Constitutions, 10 myths of American history, U.S. history, 1865, the present history up to 1865. He wrote the book on the five presidents, the screwed up America, or something like that. There's 25 people who changed America. How Alexander Hamilton screwed up America, how the Supreme Court, the originalist papers, 1, 2, 3, 4, radical Republicans. That's what we're dealing with right now. That started underneath the Lincoln administration afterwards. Reading Davis, reading Washington, reading Calhoun. Calhoun was more Jeffersonian than Jefferson. So if Jefferson's to the right of, or to the left of AOC, you'd have to say Calhoun was further left than AOC. And to say that would be one of the dumbest comments you could ever think of. So hopefully he doesn't think that, but I doubt he knows who Calhoun is. So Calhoun is one of the greatest statesmen out there. And he was more Jeffersonian than Jefferson. And John Taylor Caroline, and he was named Caroline County. He was from Caroline County. So it wasn't like John Taylor of America. It was not even John Taylor of Virginia. It was John Taylor of Caroline County. Here's reading Jefferson right here. Who is the real Jefferson? Is he the champion of natural rights or human rights? Did he believe that all men are created equal? Was Jefferson an anti-slave ideologue or a racist plantation owner? Was he committed to limited government and the Constitution, or was he a political hypocrite? These are just a few of the questions surrounding the life and times of the second most important founding father. Jefferson wrote volumes to friends and foe alike, and to those who shared his principles and those who viewed him with suspicion. He was also a public figure with several high-profile public documents, several of which are considered essential reading on the founding of these United States. Class covers 15 of the most important public and private Jeffersonian documents, including his summary review, his arguments against the Bank of the United States. I mean, you think? In the Fed, anybody call Ron Paul left of AOC, and his Kentucky resolutions. Again, you will have a deeper understanding and appreciation for the man you want once you finish this course. You will also understand the cognacy of Jefferson's thoughts over the 50-year period from his early 30s to his 80s. You must understand Jefferson to understand America. And yeah, I would have to agree with that. You'd have to understand what it is, Jeffersonian democracy, what is federalism, Jefferson, all that stuff. To just say that, I mean, again, you're looking at a centralist view. If you're going to throw him out, then you got to go, where you going with the other side? That you're going for this gigantic one nation thing. By the way, one nation was Frederick Engels' pipe of dream. He wanted everything to be one nation. It's a communistic mindset. And you'll see guys all the time, we're one nation, we're one nation, we're one nation. Obviously, if you saw the Paris Treaty, Treaty of Paris, 13 nations. They literally said these are 13 nations. Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, they're on equal par. Each of them's on equal par with England. One nation, now you want one gigantic blob. You want one guy in D.C., as Patrick Henry said, a 10-mile square. You want somebody in D.C. controlling 320 million people? That's what Trump says right now. He's the mayor of America, as he says. That is not his role. Every state has a president, the governor. Every state has its own military, the National Guard. Every state has its own constitution. If you want to get rid of the state borders, which all the communists wanted, you can get rid of all the state borders and have one gigantic blob, one consolidated mass, and you're never going to get out of it. Now, I did see that they said about the bishops are going to consecrate the United States. By the way, it used to be these United States. Now it's the United States. And if you ever watch the State of the Union address, it's not the State of the country address. It's not the State of the nation address. It's the State of the Union. This is a federal republic. That's it. It's not a country. It's not a nation. It's a federal republic. Just like the EU, the European Union, is not one nation. It's a group of European states. Israel is called a state. They also call states Middle East, states of the Middle East. Now all of a sudden it just changes when you come over here. Now it's not, states aren't like that. It's kind of like when did Genesis turn it from fiction to real? I mean, where's that line of demarcation? The same thing with these. Where's the line of demarcation? If it's a state over there, Italy's a state. How is South Carolina not a same level as Italy? But again, it gets down to decentralization. He had a great post years ago on the diocese, and there was all these just many. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. I couldn't find the original post. It was long ago when he was doing it wasn't Canterbury Tales days. I think it was just on the TaylorMarshall.com site, but it was a fantastic one. It showed Italy and all the dioceses inside Italy. As he says in here, there are 196 Catholic dioceses and eparchies in these United States. There are 227 Catholic dioceses in Italy. Goes into centralization, about part of it, localism in a sense. Look at the size of Italy in these United States. Germany was the size of Wisconsin. Can you imagine Wisconsin, the 25 different states inside Washington, Wisconsin? Again, the states need to be broken up. And then on top of that, he's 1,000% correct. These dioceses need to be broken up. South Carolina is one diocese. One. It's the Diocese of Charleston. North Carolina, which looks like it's half the size of Italy, is two. It's literally split down the middle. I don't know about Georgia or Florida. Colorado lived there, 3 dioceses. And everyone else will probably know everything. Others, wherever you are, you would know exactly what it is. But you see the point. You have a bishop that could go in 200, what was it? What was the number again? 227 in Italy. You can cover a lot more ground. You can be pastoral to more people. You can work on conversions more. You can focus on your area versus one gigantic blob. You might not even see people on one side of the state, maybe once a year. How's that pastoral? But again, same thing for government, just regular politics. If there's 227 dioceses in Italy, again, Kingdom of Naples, Kingdom of Sicily. What do you think that before unification of Italy, it was not that big. It wasn't one unity. The papal states, and even that wasn't just one thing. It was papal states with an S. And then you had different areas below and underneath it. And then there was unification of Italy, which was kind of funny because it was the North that was invading the South in Italy to do the Italian nationalization thing, unification idea. Same principle, same mindset. Now to the parts when he brings up about different cities, different areas having Muslim mayors or Muslim, or like Dearborn, for example. That goes back into federalism. Again, federalism works. We should try it. Dr. Gutzman brought that up. We should get it. We should enact federalism. It's always been there. Yeah, if you actually do it, it works. It's kind of like the idea of, because Gutzman brings that up in, was it Idaho was doing some gun, they were doing a gun vote, and they had people from New York sending money to get involved in Idaho politics. And if you know anything about that, you'd be like, get those foreigners out of my state. Get that. No, New Yorkers should not be influencing Idaho government, and they shouldn't. And the same thing would go for something like this. Do I personally want? Do I personally like Islam or Muslims running towns? No, I don't. And then you're not going to hear me say, "Yeah, I can't wait for that." But it's also, I don't live there. So if there's people in Dearborn, Michigan that wants that, I'm not even in Michigan, much less in Dearborn. I'm in a different time zone from them. So it's up to the people at that area to do what they want to do. Now, do we want to pray for their conversions? Yes. Do we send missionaries in there to convert? Yes. Nobody does that. We just get on Twitter and type and hit the record button and do something about it and just speak into a mic. We don't really do any evangelization on that. Do we go and have anybody going up there giving medals out, telling them about Jesus? Nothing like that. Now, if you're in Dearborn and you're trying that and it doesn't work, I get it. Or you can move, or you can stay and work to convert them. Same thing with New York City. Mandami. I don't live in New York City. I do not care what happens in New York City. The people in New York City should care about what happens in New York City. And again, if you look at Bill Kaufman's book, Bye Bye Miss American Empire, he's a quote unquote lefty who him and other guys are tired of being controlled by New York City politics. And they're lefties. They want an Iroquois state, break away from New York City and let them do their thing. Even states need to be broken down, as mentioned before. Michigan, most people there are ran by Detroit. Georgia, Atlanta runs Georgia. Here in North Carolina, Charlotte and Raleigh run North Carolina. Pick your state, California, LA, San Francisco, they run California. All the big cities run that. Boston runs Massachusetts. You can go down the list. Cincinnati, Cleveland, Akron, they run Ohio. Like I said, Portland runs Oregon. That's why people from Western or Eastern Oregon want to break away and join Idaho. Virginia just had a vote because Richmond and Virginia Beach in that area on the southeast run all of Virginia, and the people in Virginia, and especially the northern part where that's mostly DC people, Congress critters that are moved there, they pretty much control Virginia too. So people out not in those areas want to break away from Virginia and join West Virginia. I mean, they have to go through the state to do that, but that's options. Those are ideas. There's Colorado's had a Jeffersonian movement for a while to break away from the rest of Colorado. California's had a Jeffersonian movement for years trying to break up California. Texas in their constitution has to be able to break up 5 states, and they probably should do more. Again, when we brought up about Germany having 25 states in modern-sized Germany. Could you imagine that now? Texas could have 30 different states in Texas. So again, federalism works. If you don't like that area, you get to pick up your feet and move. I don't live in Texas. I don't care to live in Texas. But if Texas was appealing, maybe you can move. And that's competition between the states. If everything's all one blanket statement, one blanket thing, then how do you get around that? You have you can't get out. But if, say, you want to live in California, I don't know why, but it's beautiful though. But the California politics is so nuts, and you get tired of it, and you think I can't change anything. There's a place called U-Haul. You can get in a U-Haul and you can move to a state like, we'll say Florida, because they seem to be the opposite. No state income tax. They're talking about getting rid of property tax. They do have a ban on raw milk, which is weird, but they have banned fluoride in the water. They're banning geoengineering in the sky. What else? They're against the jibbity jab. A lot of good stuff in Florida. Again, the milk thing is kind of weird. I don't understand why that one is. But I mean, they're not that great on homeschooling. But Illinois, shocking enough, Illinois is pretty good on homeschooling, as much as Chicago politics, which Chicago politics run Illinois. You break away from Chicago, and there's been movements about that too, and Indiana. And mostly Illinois. There's a movement now still in the southern Illinois to break away from the rest of Illinois, let Chicago be on its own. Their homeschooling laws are pretty good. They have freedom to drink, buy raw milk. They have, it was like really, like I did not know all that. But again, Chicago's kind of kooky. Again, one state, they're all experimental state. Everything's an experiment. And once see what happens. That's why Romney Care was legal, according to the 10th Amendment, because it had nothing to do with the federal government. It had Obamacare, which is the same thing as Romney Care. Obamacare was illegal because it violated the 10th Amendment. Romney Care, albeit not a bright idea, doesn't work, but it's legal because it's the state of Massachusetts doing it. It's not everyone being forced to do it. Anyways, so again, I know it's probably wacky. You're probably thinking this guy's nuts because of what he's saying. But again, if you're living in a different area, it's the Puritan, the word Yankee comes from the idea of people in Massachusetts that couldn't sleep because they were upset at how the South was living. And they wanted the Southerners to live like people from Boston. Again, today you have people in California. You don't have to be a Northerner to be that. Today you have people in California that get upset that Alabama isn't killing babies. So they get up there every day and they're upset that Alabama, I can't believe they're not doing abortion. And you can be vice versa. I can't believe California's doing that. You know, if California wants to do that, that's on the people of California to fix California. If you're in Alabama and you got something else going on, you keep it that way or you don't keep it that way. That's on the people of Alabama to worry about. Anybody go out and say, hey, I can't believe the politics of Nigeria. We don't go, hey, I can't believe the politics of Switzerland, whatever. Again, that's the people there. If they want to live that way, that's on them. We work to convert them if it's a nutty idea or something evil. But you can't from a lazy boy and 4 time zones away and you just go, those people, I can't believe they live that way. Work to convert them. That's why I said Roe would go down because of federalism. That's if you get Justice Thomas is 100% right on that. We got to look at all those things that the Miracle Amendment, aka the 14th, has screwed up, and you would solve a lot of problems that way. And then for me, I take out a lot from the 14th on, get rid of a lot of amendments after that. Here's a link from the Imaginative Conservative. I was trying to find Clyde Wilson's famous article, but it's not. It's in a book that's now $700 because it's out of print. And Jefferson said that the earth belongs to the living, that the present generation may enjoy the fruits of the earth, but it cannot destroy the equal right of the next generation to such enjoyment. He said this was among the most important of his beliefs. This idea was attacked, of course. Jefferson is a dangerous radical, they said. He doesn't believe in tradition and stability and the passing down property to your loved ones. But what Jefferson is talking about was debt, and particularly government debt. It is deeply immoral for the present generation to use up the earth so that it leaves the next generation burdened. John Taylor comments, the present age is cajoled to tax and enslave itself by the error of believing that it taxes and enslaves future ages to enrich itself. So I appreciate you spending time on this. Again, this is not a personal attack on Dr. T. This isn't a hatred thing. This is just a correction. Brothers telling brothers, iron sharpening iron. Hey, you're on. If you got the reach, you made an error, correcting it. Someone had it. Someone has to correct it. If no one else is going to do it, fine, I'll do it. And if anybody wants to come after me for correcting anybody, fine, so be it. Here's the evidence. Tell me where I'm wrong if that's the case. Show me where I'm wrong. I'd be happy to have correction. I actually like people telling me that I messed up, and here's how I need to learn more. You grow better, like working out. You don't work out with 5-pound weights because it's easy and it's going to be fine, and you know it's not going to hurt you in any sense. No, you pound it on so you can actually grow and be better. You get stronger. You have to break down the muscles to grow. Baseball wise, coaches would yell at me in front of parents. Basketball, I remember my basketball coach telling me it was $5 for a ticket one day because I played I did the play like a robot. And next time down the court, darn right, I'm busting down that three. So I liked all my coaches were former Marines. My dad was a Marine, all that stuff. So I don't mind it. I don't want people just to blow smoke or anything like that. I want criticism. So if I'm wrong, please let me know. Tell me in the show notes where I was wrong. Everything that's going to be in here will be in the show notes. You can check it out yourself, for original source material and all that jazz. Again, don't take it personally. It's just I had to correct this, and this is up my alley. One of my things that I've been looking at for over a decade and things like that. And I heard that, like I said, and I said I have to comment because that was just so wrong in so many ways. Again, from just the Sally Hemings thing oneself, I'm going, I can't believe anybody still would believe that. And actually, I had some people write me upset at, hey, you weren't there. What kind of argument was that? I wasn't there for a rape that didn't happen. Come on. Anyways, like I said, hope this helps out, correct some things. We move forward and as a team become better for everything. Because the goal is not individualism. The goal, I look at everything as a team sport. We're all on the same team trying to do the same thing, get people to heaven and make the world better for our kids. And darn it, I'm all for that. And I'm big into I love politics. I love this. Got me back into church, reading stuff like that. Thomas Wood's book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, was all in on that. And then a bunch of his other books. And then obviously I was reading Patrick Henry's letters at the time, which was penned, 20 years after his death by his son and stuff like that. I love reading things like that, especially the Anti-Federalists and watching the arguments. Again, Mike Church was a big proponent and helped me find these guys. And Dr. Donald Livingston at the Abbeville Institute, he was my Morpheus. You talk about, there's not been a time when I've not clicked a button on him that he hasn't taught me something on there. You got to listen. If you haven't listened to Donald Livingston, good, you will learn some things. There's no way you're not going to listen to him and go, I didn't learn a thing from that. Fantastic guy. I'm going to leave you with Dr. Harrelson reading from Dr. Clyde Wilson from his book, From Union to Empire. One doctor reading another doctor on Southern conservatism, on Jeffersonian conservatism. So enjoy. God bless. Thank you for listening and have a great rest of the day.
From Union to Empire. If this book is more important now than what it was when it was originally printed, it's more relevant, it's more important. And oh yes, that's a Confederate battle flag. And oh yes, that's, look here now, that's pretty. Now, this is authored by Dr. Clyde Wilson. I've mentioned him in a previous video, and I read to you in its entirety an essay that Clyde wrote about tobacco and about the war on tobacco. And that was a well-received video. But today I want to share with you a few lines from an essay that Clyde wrote many years ago entitled The Jeffersonian Conservative Tradition. So I would implore you to just hang around for a few minutes if you're not in a hurry and just listen to Professor Wilson's argument here, which is something very similar to what I have been trying to articulate in my past two videos. As a movement of thought, the resurgent conservatism of 20th century America cannot achieve maturity with a properly worked out historical self-image. A documented and convincing picture of what traditions, tendencies, and movements it is heir to. In its earliest stages, the conservative resurgence has conceived of itself largely as an extension of the European, Burkean, and Catholic traditions, because these were the traditions most familiar to the thinkers who first gave systematic expression to anti-liberalism in this century. Now, he's writing this, of course, well before the year 2000. He's writing this probably in the 1980s. I don't know the exact date that Clyde wrote this, but that's what my suspicion is. While this approach has provided a useful philosophical critique of liberalism, it has left the history of conservatism on this side of the Atlantic in great ambiguity. Various resolutions of the ambiguity have been essayed, none satisfactory. Some liberals have drawn the conclusion, not an entirely illogical reading of the ideas of some conservatives, that the American experience has been in toto anti-conservative. In other words, anti-legitimate and anti-traditional in the Burkean sense. And that, therefore, there is and can be no American conservative tradition. And he is quoting here Professor Lewis Hart's, his work, The Liberal Tradition in America, published 1955. And we were required to read that in graduate school, and I was at Mississippi State. But I was more interested in reading Jefferson and Burke and Russell Kirk. And I think there is a strong, very old, traditionalist, conservative idea of what America is. And I don't think we're seeing that in Donald Trump. And perhaps the most important point is I don't think most people who think about conservatism in this country are thinking about it correctly. Some conservatives have tacitly accepted this view by evading the question of the historical roots of American conservatism. Others have turned to the Catholic Church, linking together such diverse and inimical figures as John Adams and John Randolph, Abraham Lincoln, and John C. Calhoun into a rather eclectic chain of tradition. And I see the same thing happening now. Well, no, that the words tradition and conservatism are very loosely employed in the current day Republican Party. It goes into a great deal of information in this essay, but there's a particular paragraph that I want to share with you. What should American conservatism seek to conserve? Dr. Wilson asks. What should American conservatism seek to conserve? Reducing analysis to the simplest possible terms. It should seek to conserve listen, this is extremely important. It should seek to conserve the structure of society and government that is the most organic, legitimate, and just for the American nation. In other words, the federal and constitutional republic bequeathed to us by that unique event, the American Revolution. A revolution which was prudential rather than revolutionary, preservative rather than innovating, legalistic rather than speculative. A revolution for life, liberty, and property, made by propertied, principled gentlemen expressing the best of their inherited political wisdom. A war of national independence, waged without mass romantic nationalism.
Join the faithful and download the Sensus Fidelium app today.